Okay, this is your intro to rigid bodies, and we're gonna make a easy, quick kind of dominoes effect with some cubes. So let's start with a plane, and just scale that up a bit. So I'll press S, and let's do scale, and then 20. It's a good size. Now, I'm also going to add in a cube, and that's going to be our domino. And I'm going to edit this. So let's just squeeze that down and make it a little taller. And I'm also going to put it close to the plane. Just vertically, and then I'm going to set some things up with our rigid bodies. Now, your rigid bodies are going to be found in your physics settings. It's not a modifier, even though it seems like it should be. But you want to go to physics and then enable physics for rigid body. I'll do that on the cube. And I'll also do that on the plane. Now they're going to be different though. So the plane is actually going to just stay here, and we want the rigid bodies to react to it. So in the type, you're going to change that to passive on the plane. Again, it's going to stay there. Now the cube, you're going to keep as active, and that's because we want this to fall and react. And kind of use the gravity in our scene. I'm also going to change some other settings. Keep in mind you have a setting for mass. We're going to leave that at 1 for now. And then you have collisions. And the important one is shape. It says convex hull here. This is the setting that's going to determine the outside kind of collision shape of your object. I could probably get away with convex hull or box, and it's going to be easier. But once you start getting into more complex shapes, you want to set this to mesh. So we're just going to do that just to be safe. And then we are ready to make some copies of this. And so to do that, we're going to make an array. And actually, before we do that, let's just hit play just to see what happens. You'll see that my cube is going to fall just a little bit and then balance on the surface. There it goes. And before I actually do the array, we'll do this one thing. We're going to add in a sphere. And this is going to start our domino effect. I'm going to leave this as is, but I'm also going to make this a rigid body. And this is going to be active. I'm going to increase the mass on this just so it's a little heavier than the dominoes. Let's just set that to 5. Now here again, I'm going to set this to mesh. And then if I press play, let's look at it from the side. It should hit and push over our cube. Now, let's go ahead and quickly set up our array. So since we want a row of these, the easiest thing we can do is go to our modifiers and add in an array. And an array, again, is going to multiply your object by however many objects you need. I'm just going to keep them going on this x-axis, which is this relative offset setting. And I want this to be just enough so that when it falls, it's going to hit the next one. So I'll set this to, that looks good, 6.5. And then I'm going to increase the number. Let's do 10. And that's what we want. Now, obviously, I'm going to move these over just so they don't fall off. And I'll now what we want to do is we want to actually make these separate objects. So to do that, we're going to apply our array, and that's going to make this all kind of permanent. Now, again, this is still one object, so we have to separate it. So to separate it, you're going to go into edit mode. You're going to go into mesh, and you're going to go into separate. And you want to separate by loose parts. And that should give you now 10 different cubes. Now you'll notice one thing in this edit mode here. I'm going to go to object mode. You'll notice that the center of all of these cubes is still on this first piece. So we want to make sure that they go back to each of the separate cubes. So I'm going to go to object, set origin, and I want to go origin to center of mass volume. And now these origins are all set. And that's important because if you press play on your rigid body and your centers are here, it's not going to work. So let's just test this out. Now, since we already set up our rigid body before we made our array, technically that should copy that into all of these pieces and it should work. There you go. And I'm just going to move the sphere over to the beginning. And let's hit play. And that should start your domino effect. And there you go. Now notice that at the end of this, this is good to know, we kind of cut this short. So I'm going to make this a little longer. So let's go to 70. And let's press play. Now you'll notice, well, now it finishes. Over here, see this yellow line here is your rigid body effects. Notice it stops at 250. We've already hit this end of the animation, but if we needed more room, and one thing you can do is you can go into your scene settings and you'll have a category for rigid body world, and in there you'll find a section for cache. This is sort of the memory for your rigid body. And right now it says simulation start 1, end 250. So if you wanted this simulation to run longer, you can change that end. And now that'll go the whole distance. Notice now that yellow line is extending. And then once it calculates it as it plays, it will make that permanent. Okay, so now all you have to do is render. So I'll set that up. Let's set up the camera. Obviously, as always, get a good view of your objects. I would put some basic materials on these guys. But I won't do that here, but you should. And then for render settings, let's do HD TV 720p. You can do a 75% for this. And then obviously output, put that in your rendered folder. File format is going to be a movie, so we want AVI JPEG. And then you can go in and render. And that is your rigid body animation.